Hello, thank you for tuning in. So I'm going to be doing this video today on C.S. Lewis. Who is C.S. Lewis? So he was born in 1898 in Belfast and he died in 1963. I'm sure that virtually all of you out there have heard of him. So he's a British scholar, author, lay theologian. He held positions at Cambridge University, Oxford University, famous author of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and the Narnia novels, generally respected and beloved writer. However, the reason that I'm featuring him today is that he's written extensively on Christianity, and also quite frequently I hear his name when people call in either to the Atheist Experience or The Line or another atheist show. Quite frequently the name of C.S. Lewis is cited together with his arguments. So I thought that I would analyze some of his arguments, or at least one of his arguments, or a sample of his reasoning, which I've done and I'm going to present here. So it's from this book. I'll try and hold it as close as I can. I actually picked it up in a second-hand bookshop 6 months ago. Fern, Seed and Elephants. It's a collection of 5 essays on Christianity. Yeah, so I was in this bookshop and I only wanted to spend £10. I'd spent £9 on 2 or 3 books. I had £1 left and I happened to see this book, C.S. Lewis. I thought, what the hell, you know, 5 essays on Christianity. I've got a YouTube channel. Why not? So anyway, right. So we're going to a chapter in which he is talking about the doctrine of the second coming. And the chapter is entitled The World's Last Night, quite appropriately so. I've actually photographed 2 pages from this chapter and we're going to look at them in a moment. However, first of all, near the beginning of the chapter, C.S. Lewis, to his credit, demonstrates some intellectual honesty, I suppose, like a disclaimer. And I'll just read what he's written because I suppose it does him some credit. Okay, so, quote, I have no claim to speak as an expert in any of the studies involved, and merely put forward the reflections which have arisen in my own mind and have seemed to me, parentheses, perhaps wrongly, to be helpful. They are all submitted to the correction of wiser heads. Okay, well, obviously we have to put this in context. Lewis wrote this in the 50s, and New Testament scholarship has advanced quite significantly since then. So we have to bear that in mind, that Lewis may not have been in possession of certain facts which we now know about the development of New Testament studies, dating of manuscripts, texts, etc. He may not have had that information. Otherwise, frankly, some of the statements that he made in here possibly would not have been written. So we have to bear that in mind, and we're going to look at some of those in a moment. But let's just have a look at this. Okay, so I think you can see now I've set my program here so that the cursor can be seen. I hope that when this video actually is uploaded and plays out that you will be able to see what I'm pointing at, because I've never actually done this before. So effectively in this chapter, what Lewis is doing is asking questions about the doctrine of the second coming. And he's picked up on the fact that Christ in Mark, he believes that he contradicts himself, and that this contradiction is evidence that the scribes or the evangelists were honestly writing down exactly what was said. I don't think that can be established, but we're going to sort of follow his reasoning, first of all, by analyzing the quotation from the Bible. So he's talking about Mark chapter 13, verses 30 to 32. So let's just see if I can find that. I've got the NIV open. There's C.S. Lewis sitting at his desk in Oxford. And here's the NIV on Bible Gateway, which I must say is an absolutely superb resource. Yeah, so we've got Mark here, and we've basically got Jesus talking about the second coming. And he's described what is going to happen, how the Son of Man will arrive in the clouds with great power and glory, etc., etc. So I'll just read here from verse 30. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Yeah, so let's just look at that again. Truly I tell you, this is really, this is a prophecy, isn't it? It's an ironclad prophecy. It's a promise that within the lifetime of people at the time of Jesus, within their lifetime, the second coming will happen. Jesus will die. Jesus will ride down on a cloud in power and glory and all the rest of it. This thing truly I tell you, I think that I've heard that verily I say unto you. It's really a promise. It's a promise and a prophecy. I don't really see how it can be taken any other way. I've not really seen any other interpretations of this. It does look like an ironclad prophecy that the second coming is imminent. Yeah. So C.S. Lewis describes this as one of the most, let's have a look, what does he say about it here? Yeah, it is certainly the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. Yeah, so that's what he says, because obviously it did not come to pass. That didn't happen. But then he points to the next verse 32, and I'll read that. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. So what Lewis is claiming is that Jesus first makes this prediction, and then just 2 lines later, he claims that in fact he doesn't know. Only God knows when exactly it's going to be, and that he doesn't know. And Lewis asks the question, if Jesus is God incarnate, how could this be so? Jesus should have the knowledge. He should have the same knowledge that God has got. Well, let's just have a look at his book here. Let's just race on. Yeah. So this problem, how could Jesus be God incarnate and not know when the second coming is going to happen? He's already said it's going to be before, within a generation. He's already promised that. He's predicted it. And then he's turned around and said, but I don't know. I'm the Son. I don't know exactly when it's going to be. Only God the Father knows. Now, the way that Lewis has interpreted this, in my opinion, is kind of questionable. Because Jesus first says it's going to be within a generation. It's going to be within the lifetime of everybody who's currently living on the planet at the moment that I'm saying this. So he's made that prediction, he's made that prophecy, and then he's turned around, and all he's really said is, we don't know the day, we don't know the exact time. So in other words, I think, well, I don't know, some of you may disagree. I think what he's saying is it's going to be within your lifetime that this is going to happen. Excuse me a moment. Yeah, so it's going to be within your lifetime. However, we don't know exactly what day, and we don't know exactly what time. Now, what Lewis is saying is that the second quotation is Jesus confessing his absolute ignorance on this question. He doesn't know the answer. He is contradicting his first quote, which Lewis says, let me just read here at the top of the page. Let's have a look. So he's talking about these two quotations, the one exhibition of error. In other words, the first quote where he says it's going to be truthfully, I say to you, it's going to be within within your lifetime. Yeah, but the point is that when Jesus supposedly said that, it wasn't known that it was an error. He didn't know that it was going to be a mistake. So it's not really an exhibition of error, because when he made it, it wasn't known whether it was going to happen or not. It was a prediction, which in hindsight we now know is wrong. But at the time he made it, it was a promise. So I don't really agree with Lewis that it's an exhibition of error, because if you come down here, he's talking about the facts. Paragraph down, halfway down the page. The facts then are these: that Jesus professed himself, and then in parentheses he puts in some sense ignorant. Now he says that. I think he's being intellectually dishonest there. I don't think that Jesus saying, truly I say unto you, all this will come to pass within the generation. It doesn't sound to me like it's a profession of self-ignorance. It sounds to me like a claim to knowledge, claim to absolute knowledge about the future. I think he's bending things here. I've come across this with Christian, shall we say, lay theologians, even professional theologians. I've come across this before, where they interpret things exactly the way they want to. When I was doing my English degree, 25 years ago, in the first year, because I was interested in the New Testament at that particular time, I took a module within the theology faculty called Introduction to New Testament Studies. Now, it was a very good module, but the lecturer, who was a Christian, was just interpreting, in my opinion, a lot of documents, a lot of documentation, and a lot of material to fit his own beliefs. He was outrageous, frankly, the way that he was interpreting Josephus. In my view, without any justification at all, trying to get over this interpolation, saying, well, it probably wasn't an interpolation, because when Josephus said, of course he was the Christ, he was being ironic. Well, how could that be demonstrated? Okay, well, that's by the by. But the point is that I've come across this with Christians before. They basically interpret it's confirmation bias. Of course it is. And I don't believe that, despite Lewis being intellectually honest at the start and saying, look, I'm not an expert, I think that he's interpreting here to suit his own beliefs. So, he says, okay, so let's go about a third down the page. All right, so he's trying to say that, okay, unless the reporter were perfectly honest, he would never have recorded the confession of ignorance at all. He could have had no motive for doing so except a desire to tell the whole truth. So he's saying, and then coming down to the end of the paragraph, they mention facts which are at first sight damaging to their main contention. So this is something that we hear quite often, that one test of whether a document is reliable is if it contains embarrassing information which, if included, would damage the case that is being made. That this somehow proves all the claims in a text, that even if this was so, even if the Mark evangelist, even if the Mark evangelist was a witness to what had been said, and in hindsight he thought, well, these sort of contradict each other, but it's the truth, and I want to be truthful to the facts, and I'm going to record both of these statements. Even if that is the case, it doesn't attest to the other claims which are recorded in Mark. For example, the miracle claims So just because maybe we can argue that, yeah, well, that must be correct, otherwise he wouldn't have put it in because it damages the case, which I think is questionable, by the way. But even if we accept that, it doesn't then follow us that miracle claims and resurrection claims are also true. Now, Lewis possibly didn't know. I don't know what the state of New Testament scholarship was at that time, but it's quite possible that they didn't know that really the earliest or most likely date for Mark was about 70 AD. I know that some outliers have put it around 50 AD, but it seems to me that most New Testament scholars, even Christians, are saying it's around 70 AD, which, let's face it, puts the evangelist maybe writing 35 years after the time of Jesus' death. And what was he working off? We know he couldn't have been it's highly unlikely that he was an eyewitness to all this. There's no evidence that he was an eyewitness. We don't know who it was. And it's quite probable that he was working off pre-existing material which had been cobbled together. And, you know, he may have had these two, he may have had this material from different sources and cobbled it in and put them both together. And he might not have seen a problem with putting them in. But to infer that Jesus really said these things is going a step far. But what's even worse for C.S. Lewis is he's claiming here, yeah, he's saying this passage, I've got the cursor here, Mark 13, verse 30 to 32, and the cry, why hast thou forsaken me? Together make up the strongest proof that the New Testament is historically reliable. I consider that to be an absolutely unreasonable claim, not really supported by any evidence, not least that I can tell you 25 years ago when I was doing New Testament studies and the professor was telling us the Gospels, the New Testament is historically reliable because of this, because of that, because of Tacitus, because of Josephus, because of, you know, the fact that women are cited as witnesses and that couldn't have happened, etc. All these embarrassing details. If you put the whole lot together, the New Testament must be regarded as historically reliable. I thought, well, great. So you know what I did? I went to the history floor at the university and I started searching. I went up and down the corridors of the bookshelves and I started searching for in the history section of these events. Now I couldn't find anything. I went and asked, do you have anything on biblical times, particularly the life and times of Jesus and the historicity of the New Testament, etc., the history as revealed by the New Testament? And they said, oh, no, we don't have it here. You'll find it in the theology department. Go to their library. I said, oh, I see. Oh, okay. And I realized then that the New Testament by historians is not regarded as being historically reliable. It's just some crazy fantasy that Christians have got, Christian scholars have got, and people like C.S. Lewis and the Archbishop of Canterbury, etc., have got this crazy idea that the New Testament is historically reliable. It is not. It's not historically reliable. I'm not saying that there are not true things in the New Testament. Of course there are. And maybe what C.S. Lewis is saying here, that, you know, these two statements are slightly embarrassing because on the one hand, Jesus is saying, yep, it's going to come within your lifetime. And on the other hand, he's saying, but we don't know when it's going to be. Okay, well, even if we interpret it C.S. Lewis's way, it doesn't necessarily then mean that the rest of the New Testament is historically reliable. That's not how it works. What you do is you take each claim and then you try to corroborate it by looking outside of the text. But Lewis doesn't seem to be aware of the historical method. Okay, so then we get to this supposed contradiction, which I don't think is a contradiction at all. And the contradiction, well, it is a kind of contradiction. The contradiction is that Jesus is supposed to be God incarnate. He's the Son, co-equal with God. And how could it be that Jesus was ignorant of things, despite being God, and should be all-knowing, should know everything, should know exactly when everything is going to happen, and did seem to be ignorant of certain things? How could this be? How could somebody be both God and ignorant at the same time? So, so if we look here, the answer of theologians is that the God-man was omniscient as God and ignorant as man. So the idea is that Jesus was God incarnate, but he only had the powers of a man. Now, I've got a problem with that. Because according to the new, that should be consistent. Yeah? You can't have it both ways. You can't have Jesus being just the man Jesus, who was not omniscient. He could not tap into knowledge from the Godhead. And he also then could not possibly have tapped into powers from the Godhead. So if Jesus didn't know when the end times were coming, the second coming, then he could not possibly have performed miracles. You can't have it both ways. Let me know what you think of that. I think if you're going to be consistent and go down this route of God the man and God the divinity, then Jesus could not possibly have performed any miracles, let alone be resurrected. Well, Lewis tries to get around this by appealing to the physical sciences. If we look at page 71 near the top, let's just read there. But the physical sciences, no less than theology, propose for our belief much that cannot be imagined. Yeah, because he said that we can't imagine this problem, this dual kind of thing about Jesus, that how can he be Jesus the man with just a man's abilities, and yet also be God? How could you imagine? Well, okay, well, maybe you can't imagine it. And he's saying that because we can't imagine certain things in physics, for example, he's citing here the curvature of space, we can't imagine that. And we also can't imagine the impossibility of imagining the consciousness of an incarnate God. So because we can't imagine certain things in science, don't be surprised that we also can't imagine certain things in theology. And he says here, I think we can acquiesce in mystery at that point. Yeah, so in other words, we can throw our hands up and say, well, there are just mysteries in this universe, in the physical universe, that we don't understand. And also, by the same token, there are mysteries in theology, and with God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, we also don't understand these things, and we just have to accept it as a mystery and just plead our ignorance. Well, I think that's about it, really. So my criticism is that I don't think Lewis has really got to grips properly with this. First of all, I don't agree with him that the second quote there, where Jesus is saying, we don't know the time in the day, I don't think he's saying there that we don't know if it's going to be this generation or the next generation, or maybe 100 or 1,000 generations from now. He's not saying that, because he's already said it's going to be before, within your lifetime. He's already made that promise. And then he's come back and said, but I can't say which day, and I can't say the exact time. I personally think that's what he's saying. That's my interpretation. But even if Lewis is correct, he's got no, and that the evangelist wanted to get them down because that was the truth. Even if that's correct, you can't then make a leap and claim that the entire New Testament is historically reliable on that basis. And then just the point about being inconsistent in claiming, on the one hand, that Jesus was wrong and he was at fault with some things, but not his moral teachings. He was wrong with his prediction because he had the ignorance of a man. He didn't know. Because he was a man, he was just God the man. He only had the powers of a man. And yet we're to believe that he performed miracles which could only possibly be in the power of a divinity, a full divinity, not man. So you can't have it both ways. And my conclusion is that I'm not impressed at all with the reasoning abilities, the ability of C.S. Lewis to assess this evidence fairly. I don't really think that he's done a good job of it at all. And I think that it smacks of confirmation bias. Yeah, okay. Well, that's all for now. I'll be back with some more C.S. Lewis because he also talks about Darwin. He's got a few things to say there. So I will be back. I'm sorry, 25-minute video, way too long to spend on C.S. Lewis, but there it is. Let me know if you have any thoughts. Bye for now.